Today on CityCast Chicago, it's the last day of class for Chicago public schools, but while students and faculty are taking a break, the school board and district officials will still be hammering out the budget. And surprise, surprise, it looks like it's going to be another contentious one, y'all. It's Thursday, June 12th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I'm here with our friends from Chalk Beat Chicago, reporter Samantha Smiley. Sammy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
We've also got editor and bureau chief Becky Vivi in the building. Becky, good to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jacoby.
All right, look, we spent a lot of time in the past year talking about budget problems at CPS. It's what led to essentially the ouster of CEO Pedro Martinez. It's one of the reasons we've switched school boards like 3 times, and yet we are still here. But since we just wrapped the legislative session, let's start with the state. Sammy, CPS, the mayor, the teachers union have all been asking for more and more state funds for the district. Did we see any of that in this budget that just passed?
For the state education pot of funding, we only saw a $307 million increase, which is a bit down from the $350 million that the evidence-based funding formula normally gets. And it's still going to be a little bit hard for us to tell how much of that money CPS will get and how much they will need to reach adequate funding. But this is something that teacher unions around the state, school districts, school administrators have been asking for, education advocates as well, because of the fact that there is no more federal COVID relief dollars to basically pad the school district budgets with. Not having more state dollars make it difficult. There's no telling how much this Chicago Public Schools can raise with their own property taxes and things like that. And also we're at a very weird time with the federal government because we don't know what's going to happen there either. So we don't know.
You talk about the 300 being less than the 350, which is already less than what people were asking for. I mean, a lot of the coverage looked pretty bleak coming out of Springfield. A lot of conversations around spending. Was that your sense of things?
Yeah, going in February, it seemed like the governor was like, we're going to try to do some increases, but it might be flat funding. And so now it's like there's a lot more flat funding, which basically means there wasn't any cuts, but there wasn't any more new dollars added. So I think some people are appreciative that there weren't cuts, but also at the same time, it is like people are still going to be struggling in this moment.
Yeah, very stagnant. Becky, with that in mind, how is CPS saying they might close their forecasted $529 million budget gap for the next school year?
Well, we haven't gotten a picture of the full budget yet. We do know that principals got budgets, principals and local school councils, individual schools got budgets. And we were told, and officials have said, that those budgets are effectively flat, kind of carried over from last year, with some increases for teacher salaries and to apply for the teacher's new contract. But the district, says as of right now that they plan to make most of the cuts to close their deficit at network levels or central office levels. And they are also still banking on money from, they were hoping maybe the state, which isn't clearly going to happen, and the city. They are still sort of pointing to the city and saying, if the city just declares all this extra TIF surplus, we will be able to more manageably able to close our budget with just those central office cuts, and we won't have to touch school budgets.
I recently read that CPS says they may try to ease the burden by pushing back some of the promises in the new CTU contract, and the teachers union responded by saying, well, that could set off a lawsuit. I mean, how is that likely to play out?
There was a slide, a screenshot of a slide from a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation that must have been given to someone somewhere. And Stacey Davis Gates, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, sent a letter to school board members with a screenshot of this slide, because one of the things on that slide said delaying delaying costs of the CTU contract. And she essentially laid out, like, if you do that, that we would sue and that we would have obviously big issues with them trying to put off some of the hard-fought wins from that contract. So that contract, reduces class sizes in early grades. It adds certain number of additional positions. And if the district were to delay those additions, that would be something that, the union would be very upset about and take legal action over. And I think one of the other big questions that hangs over the school system and the school board is, will they engage in some borrowing to close this gap and to avoid cuts? This was a big conversation last year, is do we, take out a high interest short-term loan to sort of bridge the gap between, this cliff we're hitting with the end of federal COVID dollars and when we think the state will eventually fully fund us. And the city will let TIFs expire and we'll have more of a property tax base to draw from. Those things haven't happened yet. And so to bridge the gap, the case being made, I think, by the folks in favor of this high interest short-term borrowing is like, let's just do that to get through these years and not have to make a bunch of cuts. Others are saying, be careful with this high interest borrowing because we've done that in the past and we have lots of debt still that we're paying off because of these high interest loans that we've taken out in the past. I think that's a really big question this summer is, will they make cuts or will they borrow?
Do we have a sense of how they're going to handle the notorious pension payment that, again, has led to a lot of acrimony?
Yeah, this is the city pension payment that covers a good chunk of school staff that are not covered by the teacher's contract. And historically, it's been picked up by the city, but under former Mayor Lori Lightfoot, they struck an intergovernmental agreement with the schools to sort of split that payment. When Johnson was elected, Martinez said, we're not going to do that anymore. And Johnson was definitely against it when Lightfoot did it, but now that he is the mayor, he has pushed for the school board to continue to pick up part of that pension payment. And I will say, that is a fight we'll probably see emerge as the school district budgets this summer, and frankly, as the city budgets this fall. What those two account for will also then come to a head next March when they actually need to make the payment and reconcile their books. And so until they figure out kind of more of a long-term, agreement, whether it's an intergovernmental agreement or a change to state law around who's responsible for that pension payment, we will probably have an annual fight between the school board and the city council on that.
So I know a lot of this drama is going to sound familiar to anybody who's been listening to the show since last summer, but we're in a bit of a different place now, right? The school board just selected Macklin King as the new interim CEO to take over after Pedro Martinez leaves next week. The former CPS principal currently leads educational policy at City Hall. The board voted 11-8 to approve her with one abstention. I'm thinking like you, that's a pretty close vote. So we're going to see how this plays out over the next few months. Our friends over at Chalk Beat and the Tribune have more on King's background. But the truth is, there is no honeymoon period. The biggest thing now on King's agenda, Becky confirmed, is this budget.
That interim person really will be the person that is in charge of shepherding the budget for this coming school year, which typically would be passed before July 1st, as the school's fiscal year begins July 1st. I don't know that will happen. It's possible that they pass a budget later because, again, this interim person will be just taking their seat. Ideally, that budget will be in place before the school year starts, which is in mid-August. And it's possible that, again, if they don't build a budget that bakes in that pension payment, they might have to amend it later, similar to how last year they had to amend it after they reached the contract deal with the teachers. But I would hope that this interim person will work with the school board to pass a budget that is in place before the school year starts.
Sammy, besides the budget, were there any other bills that passed this year that will change things for students and families in Chicago?
There's quite a few bills. I don't know how much the impact will be felt immediately on families, to be quite honest. But what I think that passed that was interesting was there's this lot of advocates called it the Safe Schools bill, But basically what it says is that, students who are undocumented they should be able to have a free and accessible public education. There is something about like newborn babies who are in the NICU getting access to early intervention, which is a state service that provides like support for children with disabilities between the ages of 0 to 3, that would help streamline getting those children into the program so they don't have to deal with long wait lists, because that is what's happened on the early childhood side. Something that has come up in CTU's negotiations, something that's been a big topic this time around too, is removing or unlinking student test scores with teacher evaluations. There has been some more criticism about what test scores actually show us, especially when you're talking about high poverty districts and some of the inequity between, students who are in more resource schools versus those who are in majority low income schools. And so now school districts can continue to use it or they don't have to. And then there's some other things around like creating an artificial intelligence task force to put out guidance to school districts. That's been a big topic. So, that's something just to throw out there. But something that didn't pass is the cell phone bill.
When I think across the landscape of education in this state and in this budget, right, we won't see, the $75 million increase in like getting more young people into preschool, young children into preschools, right? We're not seeing the type of investment into local school districts that educators and school administrators are asking for. The push to get community colleges to give out 4-year degrees is something that is still kind of making its way through the legislature. Sammy, from your perspective, how would you say that school administrators, educators feel that Pritzker and the state legislators are doing at this time?
Everybody acknowledges that this was a very tough budget year, right? And some of them are happy there weren't cuts, but people are like, Jesus, why couldn't we get more for our kiddos? In this point in time, we know that their classrooms are kind of stretched thin for resources. And anytime there's not a significant increase or investment, who are the children that's going to be hit the hardest? When we look at our stats across the board, right, it's always going to be students of color, it's always going to be students with disabilities and English learners. And I think moving forward, what I'll be looking at is actually like what is going to happen to some of those programs that support those students in this moment of time, because people are still recovering from COVID. Like, to be very clear, like learning loss is still a thing. The state is trying to do stuff around literacy and now math and numeracy. How do we get our kids better at doing math is the next thing that they're focusing on. How are you going to be able to do all that stuff without more investment? And investment keeping in pace with like inflation and wages and salaries and benefits going up at this point in time too. Like that's a hard one, but it's also for like the state finance people, they're kind of like, we got to figure out revenue. And I think that's like a hard push and pull at this point in time.
Becky, the past year for a lot of us has really been about covering the chaos across the top of CPS, whether it's budgets, contracts, leadership. I mean, how has that been felt by students and families?
I think this is the first time as this budget gets put together that students and families are potentially seeing the sort of trickle down impacts. Again, the fact that we have principals and schools looking at budgets that were put together by Pedro Martinez, who is on his way out the door, that relies on a big bunch of money that like may or may not come through, is a little bit, I think, off-putting for people on the ground level, and also makes it difficult for principals to not only plan and staff for the following year, but then like communicate to their school communities that everything will be fine if they know that maybe come fall everything won't be fine, or that they'll get a revised budget in the end. Yeah, they might get a revised budget at the end of July or August that says, actually, you need to cut 2 people. And it's like, that's the kind of thing that even as a parent, I'm a Chicago Public Schools parent. I listened to my school's LSC meeting where they approved the budget, and there were a number of like what ifs, possibilities, alternatives that could play out. This new structure of having elected school board members, we have seen some of these elected members start holding office hours, start their own newsletters, have lists of constituents to try to communicate with people more directly about what are their priorities, what do they want them to be advocating for. And a good example of this is, school board members have held in conjunction with CPS, but sometimes on their own, feedback on who would people like to see be the new permanent leader? We're just having an interim pick for now. Who would be the next permanent CEO, and what do they want that person to focus on as it relates to, again, school policy and sort of the nuts and bolts on the ground. And to what extent that community engagement, I think in the past, a lot of people have seen CPS's efforts at community engagement as sort of window dressing and not as authentic as they would like. But I do think with these elected board members, it is shifting to some degree, and you do hear elected members who voice these things and take no votes against things that they don't agree with or that they know that their communities don't agree with. So I do think that people on the ground, are feeling these shifts a little more and maybe getting more awareness that, like, hey, there is an elective representative now available to you when it comes to schools issues.
Not to stay in the deep end of the water too long, but do you have a sense of what a worst case scenario is as we head into the summer?
I think the worst case scenario is if there isn't additional city money, that it would certainly end up hitting schools. So it wouldn't just be central office. It wouldn't just be network positions. It would be school-based positions. We also, there are some cuts at schools related to special education that are still kind of shaking out, and we're waiting to get a fuller picture of them. But I do think that worst case scenario is, some number of layoffs at schools. So these are all hypotheticals, but we have seen cuts to COVID era programs, after school programs and summer programs, some trims there. And I think if more money doesn't come through, those cuts,
or if they don't take a loan.
Yeah, they'll move from central office and COVID programs to school programs and school staff.
Sammy, what's the biggest thing you're watching heading into the summer?
I'm going to continue to watch how some of these budget issues are going to play out across the state. Because of course, CPS is just the largest school district that we have under our belt in our beats. But, a lot of school districts are going to be hit hard by this. And I assume that it'll probably be some of our rural communities that are already dealing with teacher vacancies. And as always, I'll be reporting on how stuff at the federal level will impact the state.
I want to give a huge thank you to the team from Chalk Beat Chicago, reporter Sammy Smiley. Always a good time, my friend.
Thank you.
And Bureau Chief Becky Vivi, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is one of the absolute busiest weekends of the month, y'all. We got the 4-day Puerto Rican Festival kicking off today in Humboldt Park. Midsummer Fest starts tomorrow in Andersonville. You also got a one-night only fest in Pilsen. The Open Stage Festival tomorrow is basically an open mic for all musicians, all instrumentalists, all poets. But if you're looking for more to do, then again, while you at chicago.citycast.fm, click over into the events calendar. It's packed out. Shout out to our Hey Chicago newsletter editor, Emmy Mack. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow breaking down some key stories from the week. We're going to talk to you then. Peace.